So good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning.
I appreciate you for sitting with me today, and we will be having a discussion on love for our interpersonal, or for my interpersonal relationship class for North Carolina Central University, and my professor is Professor Wendalyn Perry. So I appreciate you for sitting with me this morning. So we're going to just kind of be a little unscripted, and which is funny because that's that is your organization, but just unscripted, and we're going to talk about what our perspectives of love. So I open the floor, yield the floor to you, and how whatever direction that you want to begin when we think of the word love, how does that relate to you in your thoughts?
So for me, I view love as being probably the most powerful force in the universe. I see it as something that can transform, can be healing. I also see love being something that can drive us to do things that we wouldn't normally do. Wars have been started over love. People have lost lives over love. There's a reason why TV shows like Snapped have been so popular, because love has driven people to do some things that they would not normally do. So I see love as being an extremely beneficial part of the human experience. But like Spider-Man, I'm a big Marvel fan, but with great power comes great responsibility. And I think love is one of those things that, when interacted with and engaged responsibly, it could literally change the world. It could literally change the world. So that's how I kind of view it. I don't view it as the bubbly, feel-good feeling that I may have when I see someone that I may be attracted to, or when I participate in a certain activity that I really enjoy. But it's really an action word. It's an action word. It's an intentional kind of force that it's onset by feelings and emotion, but after that, there's actions that take place to continue to manifest and grow the love with people.
So how much of the word love would you say is esoteric versus more finite? Like I think a lot of times that when we view the word love, we connect it to an emotion. And as you just got through explaining that love, it can be a form of emotion. It could show itself in the form of emotion. Let me say it like that. Love can show itself in the form of an emotion, but it can also be something that is very finite and tangible in how your actions and your actionability, if that's a word, shows, and how we move. And how much of love, moving from an esoteric perspective, would you say it is into a spiritual perspective? I think a lot of times that the way that we move and how we perceive love, we try to separate it and say, oh, well, this is love, or this is love, or this is not love. Does that make sense of what I'm saying? And then we also apply love in, I think, in ways that better phraseology would do its better service. So, for example, if you like Popeye's chicken, somebody, I love chicken, type of thing. And when, no, you don't really love it, you just really like it a lot, type of thing. So a lot of times we are using the word love in the wrong applications or in the wrong situations. Does my question make sense?
Yeah. So I think for a large part, it's dependent upon how you were introduced to love. Like how were you introduced to what love is? For many of us, it was through Disney. It was through Disney cartoons. So we got this romanticized idea of what love is supposed to look like. Some of the earliest imageries I have are from like Aladdin. Like he saw this girl and he was willing to do all these things to get this girl, even so much so of being someone that he was not, pretending. So I think how we are introduced to love can kind of frame how we view it and how we relate to it. I know for me, thinking about love growing up, I remember seeing my parents hugging. I remember seeing them kissing, that kind of thing. And when I asked them about that, I was fortunate to have parents say, hey, this is how we express love. But everyone doesn't have that. Love can be viewed or can be interpreted in many different ways. One way that I see, especially with people who are trying to relate with their fathers, especially millennials now that we're older, a lot of our fathers were providers, and the way that they said that they were expressing love was through an action, through providing. But we may not have felt it because we thought when someone loves us, they hug us, they touch us, they verbalize it. So depending on how you're introduced to it, I think that really determines like what mindset you have when you look out into the real world and when you seek it and when you start to interact with it. I think that's why so many people, when they're either dating or they're starting a relationship, if it doesn't fit what they thought it was, then they don't view someone's expression of love as actually love.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you on that. I think about, your statement, you said, is it how it was introduced to you, how love, and I do see that. I believe that many of the issues that people have in their life is because of how love was introduced to them, and or lack of introduced to them. So you have people who have a generational cycle of abuse or a generational cycle of promiscuousness, multiple children and things of that nature, because they don't have a healthy understanding of how love could be seen. When and I think that in terms of terms of men also, that men have a way of being very, like you said, my love is in form of protection. My love is in form of providing. I'm a great provider for you. Don't you see that if I loved you, I wouldn't have paid the light bill, type of thing. And helping people understand that it does not have to be emotionless.
Right.
That it can have emotional connections, but then at the same token, love also comes in discipline. Love also comes in structure. Love. So with my son, one of the ways that I show him love is that I have standards for him. I require him to do a certain thing in a certain way. And I believe that if I did not have those standards, then I would leave him to fend for himself. And I think that we in society, a lot of times that people misunderstand that if I didn't love you, I wouldn't hold you accountable. If I didn't love you, I would not have consequences for the things that you do. But some perceive like, oh, well, because you have consequences, that means you don't love me. Does that, And I think so. It's such the word love to me is so fluid, because it can be what you need it to be in whatever way that it needs to be, but yet at the same time, it's not. It's fluid, but it's also stationary, so it's such a challenging word or thought to define and to use, or
I love how you're working through that, because I think a lot of people, when it comes to love, have a challenge expressing it or being able to explain what love looks like to them. So if you have two people who are in interaction with each other, if I don't understand what your love is and what it looks like, then I can't receive it or view it in the way that you're trying to give it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think communication, whether it's parent to child, whether it's partner to partner, whether it's coworker to employee, being able to communicate about what it looks like is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
And because it can be so hard to verbalize, a lot of people forego and try to say, well, let me just show you.
Mm-hmm.
Or they say, well, it's just a feeling I have. I'll know it when it's here.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't work. That doesn't work. How do we know this? Because tons of couples go to therapy every week and it's just a miscommunication. It's like, no, I really did care about you because I tried to do this.
Yes.
Or I loved you in this kind of way by setting up this parameter. But if the other person doesn't know that that's what's trying to be expressed, then the message is missed. It's a mute point. It becomes a really big misunderstanding. And so one of the things that I think is really essential to love is that love needs to be talked about. It has to be communicated. Even if you don't have the words, try. It's okay to fumble through it, because also that shows a different level of vulnerability and openness when you can say, I don't really have the words, but I'm going to try to share it with you some kind of way. And just people seeing that effort draws people closer. It really does. So being willing to talk about what I'm trying to express as love, even though, I'm sorry, a lot of people think, well, if it's real love, then it'll just happen. No, you have to talk about it and understand that people have different backgrounds. They were raised a different way. They show love differently. The way they're showing love isn't wrong. It's just different from how you're used to receiving and or giving. So when love really is there, love makes the effort to bridge the gap and to hear and listen and understand the other person, rather than saying, because you're not showing love to me in the way that I'm accustomed to getting it, you don't love me. So
I
yeah.
I agree 1000% with you with that. And I also don't believe in the phrase in love. Like, have you ever been in love, or have you fallen in love? I think for me, I will say one thing that I believe in my definition and understanding of love is intentional. So because I believe that love is intentional, it's not something that I fall into. It's not something that I rest into. Does that make sense in what I'm saying?
1,000%.
When I've been asked in my past, in terms of, now removing it from parental type of love, or removing it from coworker or sibling type of love, and moving it in towards partnership type of love. For me, I believe that it is something that I intention myself to do. And so with that being said, like I've been asked before, have I ever been in love? And I have not. I've been infatuated with relationships and the men in the relationships that I've been in before, but I have never been in love, because I have not allowed myself to be intentionally that vulnerable to somebody that I didn't feel had my best interests. And so with that understanding, that is why I say, in my perspective, that that love is intentional. That it is not something that you just like, I was walking down the street and I saw the guy across the street, and I knew at that moment, at that time, that man was the one that the Lord like intended for me. Or I went to a hotel and the woman showed up inside the elevator, and I knew at that moment, at that time, that I was in love. We hear these stories, and I'm not taking anything away from that person, but I think that what you felt was infatuation. I believe that your emotions, your serotonin and everything was all going.
Everything was firing.
Yeah, exactly. All cylinders were going, and you're like, wow, kind of thing. And that person looked at you and they were like, kind of thing. And so you connected, and you were in a willing space to allow yourself to to be open to each other, to build. And whether that time period is we married within 3 days and we've been together for 30 years or 3 months or whatever, it had to do with your ability and your availability to be open in that moment and in that time. And so because you availed yourself to be open in that moment, in that time, that's how it manifested itself. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
But it does not mean in general society that people fall in love. I just have a major, and I've had this discussion with people so many times that people just argue me down and tell me that I'm completely wrong. And I'm like, okay.
Listen, and here's the thing. I think media has a lot to do with how we've been programmed to think of that interaction where we are very infatuated and correlate that with being in love. I think that's a messaging that we've been taught. But one thing that I love to do is talk to older couples who have been married 35, 45, 55 years, and all of them to the T have used the word, everything we've done has been intentional. Nothing is left to a feeling or an emotion. If there's a challenge, we are intentionally trying to figure it out. If we want more time with each other, we are intentionally planning to make it happen so that our needs can be met.
That's right.
A lot of people don't want the intentionality part. Like I have so many friends that are like, Joe, if love is going to happen, it's just going to have to hit me and I'm just going to have to feel it. And it's just going to have to be a vibe, as everyone's saying. It's just supposed to be
the energy.
Right. Or they'll say, if it's meant to be, then there won't be any kind of hardships or adjustments because it'll be perfect. Listen, talk to some of these older couples. They have been through it long enough to know that if you want anything to last and to grow, you have to be intentional. And what's so surprising is a lot of these older couples that have been married 35, 45, 55, they say they grow to love their partner even more through intentionality. It's in their control. So if something's not going the way they want, they don't have to wait for the other person to feel or to be in the same headspace. No, we can put a plan together and start making adjustments to where we both feel heard, our needs are met, life changes happen. Like that's the next thing. Like I built my brand off of love being unscripted because there are gonna be things that we cannot predict. Like you don't know they're gonna happen. But with intentionality, you can get through just about anything. If you communicate, like we talked about earlier, you can find ways to make your way through some of these situations and circumstances, but you're not going to get through it on feelings. You're not going to get through it on emotion alone. It's not. I tell people all the time, people think it's crazy when couples say this, but as I've been married, I'm going into year 8. I really understand the fact that you're not always going to like your partner. Like you're not always going to have that nice bubbly feeling. Like it's not always going to be there. But as you grow together, you start to appreciate and love them in a different way that is not so roller coaster high, but it's almost more of a even keel, up, down. You're going at a steady pace, which is actually better for you when you're trying to build a long-term relationship. We can't sustain the high highs and low lows that we experience when we're like dating and stuff. That your brain will be fried, you'll be emotional wreck. But being intentional and having a plan reduces stress, reduces anxiety about the major things that happen, and you don't question whether or not they love you because guess what? We have a plan, we're working through it, and we're going to get there together.
How much of that would you say takes away from the spontaneity of what people perceive to be in terms of love? That, love should be just, if you love me, you'll do things just because, that type of thing. So with being intentional, for me, intentional shows up in its way of being consistent. So they go hand in hand with each other. So if we are planning something, then that we're consistent with what it is that we do. We consistently make that time to do those things unless something outside of our own control comes. But beyond that, it is intentional and consistent. It's it's not spontaneous to the extent that there's no commitment with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's
sometimes that's where I see that people fall into they fall into issues, is because they don't want to lock down consistency. They don't want to lock down, okay, on this day at this time, this is what we're doing, or I will take control to do this thing or what have you, and they leave it to chance. And it's my attitude about things is, if you don't plan something, you will do nothing. So so let's say you and your wife next Wednesday, you decide that you want to go to dinner next Wednesday. And she was like, well, hun, you gonna make the plans. You're like, no, you make the plans, and she's like, no, you make the plans. Either way, nobody makes the plans.
right.
Wednesday comes, and somebody's sitting around here brooding, let's say not Wednesday, Thursday comes, and someone is upset, and you're like, well, why are you upset? Well, I said I wanted to do something on Wednesday. Well, I told you to do it. Well, I told you to. Well, no one took the time to be intentional, to plan to do something. So if you don't plan it, you won't do it. And my attitude is, plan it. And if something comes up, you can always reschedule. But if you don't plan it, you won't do it.
Listen.
So I just kind of feel like that in terms of love, that there's not a lot of room in my perspective for spontaneity. I think spontaneity is the devil.
Yeah. So here's another thing, and that's one of the, I guess, arguments for why people don't want to be in either long-term committed relationships or marriages, because they say it kills the spontaneity. I think that you can have both. I think planning stuff and spontaneity can go hand in hand. I think it's a both and, not an either or. You don't have to sacrifice spontaneity for structure, nor do you have to sacrifice structure for spontaneity. Mm-hmm. You can actually say, hey, this is the night that we're going to go out. You can say, hey, we're going to eat here, but then this next one is going to be a surprise. We're going to have a little piece of paper. We're going to put them all into a bowl. And as we're leaving dinner, we're just going to pick something out. So then when you pick it out, neither of you know what it is, but guess what? There's structure because you have some things that you can do. It's open, because you checked. Now we just got to figure out where we're going to go. Okay, we're going to go skating. You had no idea you're going to do it because you're just leaving it up to fate, as some people like to say, or just leave it up to whatever could happen. Mm-hmm. And now you have a structured, spontaneous date night. There's even apps now for people who like to travel where they'll say, hey, we'll give you the flight and we'll give you the hotel, but all the excursions and stuff in between, you just got to be ready at these times. Mm-hmm. It's structured because if you have kids, you got to know when to get the sitter, send them to the in-laws. But also, once you get there, now you're like, okay, what are they going to do? Taxi's coming to take us. We're going to go to this art museum. Then next, we're going to a cooking class. Structured, but still very spontaneous. So listen, we can find ways to do what we want to do. And if we are intentional and actually want to have that time with our partners and still want the spontaneity, there are ways we can do it. It just takes time to think about them.
I agree with you 100%. I went into gosh, that was great. I like that. Oh, I love that idea. The bowl with the picking out different things in it. That's a great idea. I like that a lot. When we think about love and its presence within the variety of relationships that people have, how strong or weak do you think that it can or is if someone does not have a spiritual relationship?
So here's I like to start here. It's always good to have either a similar understanding spiritually, mm-hmm. or have some type of, I guess I'll say, mutual respect for people's spirituality as you're trying to interact in love. And the reason I say that is because there are people who, let's say, even if you're Christian, there are many different denominations and beliefs within that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think I think we're all spiritual beings. I believe that's a big part of us.
Mm-hmm.
Having someone who identifies the same, either similarly, I won't say the same because I'm married and I still don't believe some of the same ways as my wife, but have a similar respect and understanding of how that operates and how it's a part of you can actually strengthen it. But if you guys are on completely different ends of the spectrum, as far as, I don't believe in spirituality or any of that, I don't do religion, but you guys are trying to make it work, then there's going to be some kind of disconnect, because it's such a part of you that your love is actually expressed through that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a conduit through which you show love to somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you guys aren't sharing the same conduit, then it's going to feel, it's not going to feel natural. It's going to feel like there's something not clicking. And I've heard, like, whenever I do counseling with couples, I've heard it plenty of times. People have completely different spiritual beliefs, and they're like, we don't understand why we're not working. We like each other, this and that, but they have spiritual practices that they participate in daily. And when they come together and try to connect spiritually, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Not that anyone's particular spiritual system is wrong, but I think being in agreement. How can two walk together unless they agree? Some type of agreement that they're going forward with. There has to be something in place. If you can't, then you're always going to be going in two separate directions. So like I said, it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to believe the exact same thing, but there does have to be an agreement on the spirituality, how love is expressed through that, and what direction you want to take.
With that understanding, can I've heard people make statements to say that there is a person cannot truly love unless they have a spiritual connection. So basically dismissing those who do not have, let's say, atheists or agnostic, or those who do not believe in a higher being. What are your thoughts about that for those who may not embrace a level of spirituality such as you and I, and they are atheists or agnostic? Does it mean that their love level or their love meter is only tapped at a certain spot because they don't have a quote unquote connection, so to speak?
Is it capped? I don't believe so. I think there's still possibility. That's a good question, because I'm thinking, depending on what you mean by spirituality and how, when you say tap, do you mean like the inability to love past a certain level? Because here's the thing, like, I know my parents weren't always spiritual, but I still felt loved, cared for. And even after they became spiritual, I still felt loved. So I think it depends on, when you say spiritual, how people view it and to what extent are they expecting love to be expressed. Because it's hard to express love in a spiritual way if you're not in agreement with that. So just because I would say I don't see someone being able to love in a certain way doesn't mean they don't have that ability, maybe just within the confines of your spiritual framework. Because here's the thing, there are multiple, I believe in the Bible, and there are scriptures where it talks about how the believing wife can win over an unbelieving husband.
Yes, it is.
And so even with that, I don't see anywhere where it says leave the husband that's unbelieving or doesn't have the spiritual connection, but the interaction can bring somebody along. So I also like to leave space for that, because it's love, like I said earlier, love is very powerful and influential. So if you cut someone off because they're not in a spiritual place to express love where you think they are right now, that doesn't mean they can't get there, or it doesn't mean that they will never have that experience. But also, if someone's not coming along at the speed that you would like, maybe you're trying to see how it's going. That's something to consider as well, especially if you're dating. So yeah, that's a really good question, and I still got to think on that one some more.
I think that I think you have to determine in that at the end of, I think that you need to make the determination if that love is the type of love that you want, if that love is the type of love that will feed you, because it, like you said, I don't believe that person's love is capped off, in any existence or any type of way, but it may manifest it in a way that you do not, that you don't care for,
it doesn't align with you.
Yeah, it may show up in a way that may not work with what your understanding is, because spirituality, whatever your religious affiliation is, whether you choose to identify yourself as Christian, as you and I both do, or if you identify yourself as Muslim or Buddhism or Taoism, at the end of the day, they all have a connection to a being, an entity. And that entity and that being speaks to love and how it should show up in those particular religions and how it manifests within those religions. So all of them speak to love and how you should carry yourself in terms of your spiritual relationship and your identification with that religion. So I find that if you are not adhering or you don't accept any form of spirituality, whatever that may, it could be, voodoo, Yoruba, whatever it is, if you don't accept it, then the person who you get involved with, who does have a connection in whatever lane that they have chosen, it's going to be hard for you to it's not saying that you can't, but it's just going to be more challenging I believe, for you to see what love looks like from each perspective.
Absolutely.
Because because your form of love, as you stated it earlier, your form of love is going to show up in the manner that you were indoctrinated to experience and to see. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I don't even see that necessarily being a religious kind of thing. It's just a person and people thing. It's like the principles that I live by also govern the love that I show. And one of the things, especially with spiritual systems, they are principles that guide life. And like you said, love is part of that. I know plenty of people who in their spiritual belief system don't believe in eating animals.
That's right.
So for them to become in relationship with someone who does not have that same belief, that's going to cause friction in how love is expressed, especially if you're eating meat on a continuous basis, or you're trying it and you're starting to not be who you are. If you know you love meat, own that. I know you want this person to like you and want them to accept you, but that they're not going to budge on that, nor necessarily do you have to budge on that. But being okay with, hey, this is who I am, these are my beliefs, and these govern how I express love and how I operate in the world, being okay with that is going to make all the difference when you go to show love.
I like that you use that as an example, because I come from that type of household. My mother was raised a vegetarian. And she did not eat meat, and whereas my father, he was raised in a household, he was, raised hardcore Southern, and, if it probably, if it had two legs and blinked, they would probably eat it, from the rooter to the scooter, to the way they said that they didn't, that was something, that's how they ate. But my mother, she would cook my father's food separately from her food. And she would use pans and things like that, and how she would cook her food. And she never had an issue whatsoever. As when I was a lot younger, way younger, and I noticed how she would do that. I, as an adult woman, look back at what she did, and I would say that that was a form of love because of her, taking the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to cook you something. She very well could have been like, look, I'm vegetarian. You get on in there, you cook your pork chops the way that you want to cook your pork chops, She wouldn't do that, So I think that was a manifestation a manifestation of love in their relationship and how she did those particular things. And so I do agree with you that it can cause friction, but it can also, it goes back to something that you said and you led out with was communication. That it is a discussion that you have to have, and you have to be honest with yourself. Can I accept this thing? Or can I not accept this particular thing? I find that in relationships, that in whatever form of relationships, the root of the issue is not just communication, but more so honesty. Honesty to the extent that you are not honest with yourself, not honest with the other person, but you're not honest with yourself to say, I can or cannot tolerate this particular value or way or task or whatever that thing is, that it's not for me. And I think that in our society that we are so taught that we are supposed to be more accepting, and love means unity and accepting people for who they are. And so when you take a stance of that's not for me, you're so supposedly non-loving. And that doesn't, and in my perspective, that doesn't mean that you're unloving. It just means that you've learned to love yourself, to know that I'm not going to, and so it's both ways. I've learned to love myself, to know that my best way to love you is to not put myself or you in a position that would cause friction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's who there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
Because like all right, so an example I could give you, not just in terms of the food, is I remember many years ago, a friend of mine shared with me that he was dating a young lady, and while they were dating, when he first met her, he went over to her home and he noticed that she didn't keep a house the way that he liked. Things weren't orderly, things were everywhere, just messed up. So he liked this young lady a lot. And so since he had his own place, what they made the agreement would be, they would just do all of their time, that they would spend time over at his house or his apartment and not go over to hers. So now he clearly saw when he first met her that the house, that she didn't keep house the way that he liked. Okay. So fast forward, they end up getting married. And when they got married, they only stayed married for 2 years. And one of the reasons why they end up getting married, a divorce amongst other reasons, was he couldn't tolerate how she kept house. And I said, but you knew that from the very beginning. You literally walked in her head. She didn't surprise you. You know what I'm saying? You knew. You went over to her house. You saw how she kept home. And you chose to lie to yourself and say that I can tolerate that behavior. And now both of you are having to heal from that lie. And so I think that when we are honest as as rough as it may sound to society, and as it may perceive to be non-loving, it really is more of a loving gesture when you say that I cannot tolerate a specific thing, because what you won't tolerate, somebody else will. But you move forward and to press that situation to be with that person, knowing full well that that is a deal breaker for you, but you won't stand by that that's a deal breaker for you.
Yeah, love speaks up. I say it all, love will speak up. It'll express what you like and what you don't like. Like it has to be verbalized. Hey. Okay. No, sorry. Yeah, you have to speak up. You have to speak up. You have to be able to say what it is you will and will not tolerate, but you can only do that when you've been able to tell yourself yes and no to things. A lot of people are not at the point where they can say no and be okay with that because of the opinions of others, because how they may be viewed, especially in relationship. You don't want to say, man, I don't like the fact that you always leave stuff there, because of the possible friction it may cause. And that's a natural feeling to have. But if you lean into it, what we find is that you'll actually smooth out that situation, and there becomes more understanding and love can grow versus just tolerating it. A lot of people just tolerate stuff, and it's like shoving your clothes into a closet and not addressing them. And before long, you're gonna have so much stuff piled up, and then that one little small thing, after you throw it in there, the door busts down, you're fighting and cussing at each other, and you're like, yo, it was just a sock, but that sock was a t-shirt here. It was a cup on the nightstand. It was something over here, over there, and it just built up. But because we didn't say anything, because we were I think we're either driven by love or fear. I think fear of confrontation prevents a lot of people from saying what it is they need or mean, or being willing to turn people down. Like that's one of the things you have to be willing to say. Me and my wife, before we got engaged, we had a really deep conversation about what we expect in as far as a home. I, for one, absolutely hate cleaning the bathrooms. My wife absolutely hates dishes and dishwasher, that type of stuff. So before we even got married, we made a pact that, hey, it is her responsibility to do the bathrooms and it's my responsibility to do the dishes. And that is the ground rule. That's law. If the bathroom starts looking out of hand, it's your responsibility. If the dishes start piling up, it's mine. But guess what? That has worked for us. It has worked because we were both willing to say, hey, I don't like doing this. Can we figure out a way for this to still get done? Because the bathroom got to get done. The dishes are going to have to get cleaned. So what can we do? And it takes bravery to say that. I don't want to do something. And I think a lot of people are either still processing stuff from their childhood where they may not have been able to speak up. They may not have been able to say no, or I don't like something, or I don't want to participate. And so we just go along with it. So I think investigating that, like, what is it that makes it difficult for you to show up for yourself? That's how I like to say it. Not to say no to others, but to show up for yourself. What is stopping you or preventing you from saying, in this moment, I don't want to go to that family function, so I'm going to stay home. Mm-hmm. Rather than, you know what, let me make this a labor of love and go over there. No, that's actually going to be more damaging to your mental psyche and your emotional health than it would to say, you know what, I don't want to go over there to this family function this weekend. I'd rather stay home. So loving yourself enough to show up for yourself is a journey. Listen, I'm still on this journey. I'm just figuring out more stuff about myself, even this week, that I'm still working on some things to where I can love myself enough to show up for myself in marriage as a husband, in life as a son, in life as a brother. Like, those are things that I'm continuously having to work through, but it all starts from my ability to love myself first. And then how does that help me interact with other people. Because I found that people like me a lot better when I'm loving myself first rather than me just going along with stuff.
I agree with you 100%. I love how you said that love speaks up, and you also said, you also mentioned bravery. 7 things I've pulled from our conversation so far in terms of that we could use as a working definition for love is, as you stated, love speaks up. Love communicates. Love is fearless, and shows bravery. Love is humble. Love is truthful. Love compromises positively. So we learn how to make positive compromises versus settling. And love is vulnerable. And so I think that those are excellent definitions. In addition to, we do have, scripture that says love is patient, love is kind. But I think that when we think about those particular words, patient, kind, I think that the root of those is that you can't be patient, you can't be kind if you're not humble, if you're not truthful, if you're not speaking up. Because if you can't speak up for yourself, I love that. I absolutely love that. I think that if you can't find your own voice, if you cannot find your own voice, how can you expect someone else to speak up for you, or and to understand whom you are and your journey of where you've come from and where you're going, and be willing to say that I want to join you on that journey if you can't find your voice. And you're right. I think that many people have lived their lives in silence, emotional silence, mental silence. So it just that we have been conditioned to don't talk about it, but be about it, type of thing. And so because society does not want to hear, because when you do talk about certain things, you're labeled as a complainer. Oh, you're complaining about this and you complain, when it's not necessarily the fact that you're complaining, you're speaking about your situation. But I think that you have to, when you find your voice, I guess the way I'm looking at it is when you find your voice, you find your power. And I was speaking with Dr. Ann yesterday, and we were talking about sexuality. And so I was sharing with her, and she agreed with me that people need to understand that sexual intercourse is not sexuality. And so I'm going somewhere with this, back to love and finding your voice. And so what I mean by that is that your sexuality is who you are as a man, who you are as a woman, And so as you understand who you are as that man or as that woman, it gives you that voice. And so, and how does that show up? That means as a woman, if I have to go to the OBGYN and I'm having certain things that are going on, I have a voice to speak up for myself and say that, I'm having a lump in, my breast, or I see this, but when you don't have your voice, you're so bashful that you won't even talk to someone about something serious concerning you and your body. Does that make sense of what I'm saying? So you deny your sexuality, or you deny your voice because you're denying your sexuality. And so when you find your voice, it allows you to advocate on behalf of yourself. So it can play a part in many different arenas, not just your sexuality. And I think that that's what happens, is that people don't find their voice. They're not.
And think about it,
who they are.
Right. And think about it. We've been given messages about who we are since we were kids. People have always tried to tell us who you are. Oh, you're going to be a pastor. You're going to be this. You're going to be that. Advertising, social media is always telling you what you want to buy, what you need, what you're missing out on. So we're always receiving messages that are contrary to who we truly are. And I always tell people, it's okay if at this point in time, you don't understand your voice, you don't know who you are. But now, once you know that, it's your responsibility to start removing some of that stuff, to start unlearning some of those messages that were taught to you by your family, by churches, by whoever it is, so that you can get to who your God-given voice is. That's a process, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's intentionality, like we talked about recently, to be able to build yourself back up. And it takes time. It's not going to be an overnight fix. You're not going to just all of a sudden start being able to say no to your family. Like, listen, I come from a Caribbean household, and sometimes it's extremely difficult to tell my parents, no, I don't want to do something, because innately and culturally, I feel like I'm disrespecting them if I don't want to run an errand for them or take them to do something. But my voice still matters. Just because I don't do doesn't mean I'm still not that person that God has called me to be. And I'm still not able to show up in the world the way that I was meant to show up. So being able to unlearn a lot of the messages, cut out some of the messaging that we're receiving, because some of it is through consumption of media. Like, we have to cut some of that out. Because there's a study that came out that said the average person only has about 6 minutes of silence a day. Wow. 6 minutes of silence. So if all of that is filled with work, doing this, doing that, and you only got about 6 minutes of silence in a 24-hour period, there's very little space to hear your own self, to listen. I love sitting in silence, because it allows me to say, okay, that voice is in me. Okay, I hear that. No, that came from YouTube. They're telling me I need to be at this point in life, but no, that's not really where I need to be. I'm where I'm supposed to be. So being able to go through that process, it allows you to, in turn, love yourself, have your voice, and then that love is going to start coming out in everything you do.
Yeah, I agree with you. And being okay to say, I changed my mind. It's okay to say, I changed. As you grow, you're hopefully, you don't always embrace and hold on to some things that you were when you were younger. Some things you should, but then there are other things that you don't. It's okay to readjust your perspective, or and to, like you said, pull away or purge away from certain ideologies that may not work for you, or certain doctrines that may not work for you. I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, and I love the Adventist church, but I believe that in certain things, I've learned to adjust it for my lifestyle, if that makes sense. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that I no longer embrace being Adventist, because I do, but it's just I have allowed the Lord to show me the definition and how that framework works for my life, opposed to the framework that I was taught. And because that was not working for me. So I found that I was, going into visiting other churches and denominations and et cetera, and completely then at one time just completely like, forget this thing altogether, just get church, period. And once I really sat and understood that, you know what, I don't have a problem with Adventism. I have a problem with the people within Adventism. So let me readjust my framework of what, and ask God to show me how to almost kind of, you can say, like, build it for myself, like Bob the Builder, build this framework for myself and build this understanding that that way I can stay adherent to what I first love, and what he showed me in my heart, but at the same time, allowing myself the opportunity to breathe and to flourish in that same space. So
that was powerful. I want to, you said, I don't have a problem per se with the, I guess, the doctrine Seventh Day is the people. And I think people are the same way. They don't have an issue with love. They have an issue with the people that they're trying to express and do love with.
There you go.
I think that's a big difference.
Yes.
Because essentially, if it's in your most ideal situation and it works well, you want it. But it's the people that are doing it with you and trying to figure this thing out, some of those people aren't good for you and
Right.
aren't good people to express your love to. So then that makes people say, you know what, I'm done with love. I'm like, no, you ain't done with love, because
Right.
if it showed up in the perfect package, you'd be signed up, ready to go. But
That's
it's the
right.
people that are muddying up the water and making things a little difficult.
Yeah, and like, yes, it is the people. It's two sides. One side is the people, and it's the other side of you not having a voice. So when you don't have a voice, what that looks like is you don't have boundaries. You don't have standards. You don't, you don't allow yourself to understand, okay, well, this is, I can go this far, but not that far, And so yeah, so I say learning to have a voice, and also learning to whom to allow that space, to whom to do life with in that space. There we go. And then that's whatever functionality, whether that's in the corporate world, whether that's in regular everyday life, siblings, what have you, because sometimes your siblings, you got to kind of put them in a certain space also, and your family, period. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that was the last word that I added to this definition, is love is intentional, and we talked about that from the very beginning. So I wanted to thank you so much for this. Was such a great conversation.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
And it really it gives me a lot to think about, especially when fearlessness. I have allowed myself to not be fearless. I've been more fearful than fearless, and I have not executed my bravery in terms of love. And so yes, that is definitely something that I will take away from this, in addition to the other conversations. But I want to thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and end this really quickly. I thank you for the opportunity to have this communication with you. It's been such a fruitful conversation. And hopefully those who look at this will take away something positive from our conversation. Let's see.